Now that we've gone over the subject pronouns, we're going to talk about conjugating. Conjugating, the term, makes it sound a lot more complicated than what it is. You conjugate hundreds of times every day in English and you don't know that you do it. It's automatic for you. So conjugating is just making the verb sound right with whoever's doing the action. So if you hear like, I goes to the mall after school, you can hear right away in English that's not conjugated correctly. You didn't change the verb to make it sound right with who's doing the action. So we'd say, I go to the mall after school, as opposed to, he goes to the mall after school. So conjugating, like I said, is just changing the verb so that it sounds right with whoever's doing the action, the subject pronoun. Now, it's not going to sound right to you yet, or not, in Spanish because you're just not familiar with the endings. And you're going to have to think about this in steps. So conjugating a verb in the present tense, and by doing it in the present tense, that way you can talk about what someone is doing, normally does, or will do. To do that, take the AR, the ER, or the IR off the infinitive form of the verb. So the infinitive, chicos, is all these words that you learned last chapter, like hablar, cantar, correr. So to do that, first step, just take that off. What's left, that is what's called the stem. And the stem you're going to kind of think of as the basic building block of all the other verb forms. Then you're going to add the verb ending to that stem. So you'll add the different endings to these basic building blocks. You'll have different endings depending on what kind of verb it is. If it's an AR verb and you're saying I do something, you're going to add an O to that stem. You do something, as. You formal or he or she does something, a, or it does something, a. We do something, amos. You guys or they do something, an. So this is what it's going to look like with the verb hablar. Hablar is the infinitive, the to speak, to talk form. We took off the AR, and that means that that's going to be the base, the stem for all the other forms. That's the building block. And so to say I speak, hablo. You speak, hablas. Habla, if you use it with usted, usted habla, you formal speak. He speaks, él habla. She speaks, ella habla. And you could also use this with a person's name too, like Barbie habla. We speak, hablamos. You're adding amos to that basic building block. You guys speak or they speak, hablan. So if it's ellas hablan, they speak. Ustedes hablan, you guys speak. For ER verbs, the endings are very similar to AR. Saying I do something is still O. Where it was as before that you were adding, you're now going to add es. Instead of a, e. Instead of amos, hemos. Instead of an, en. So very similar. With the verb correr, to run, we take off the ER. Cor is our basic building block, our stem. And so you add the O. Corro, I run. Corres, you run. Corre, if you use it with usted, you formal run. Él corre, he runs. Ella corre, she runs. Corremos, we run. Corren, ustedes corren, you guys run. Ellos, ellas corren, they run. IR endings are the same as ER endings except for in one form. So it's O, es, e. Instead of hemos, it's imos, and then en. We haven't had many IR verbs yet, but this is what it would look like with the verb escribir, to write. Of course, we take off the IR, giving us escrib. That's our basic building block. That's the stem. Escribo. I write. Escribes. You write. Él escribe. He writes. Here's the different one. Escribimos. We write. Escriben. You guys write if it's ustedes escriben. Ellos escriben. Ellas escriben. They write. So there are only there are only three kinds of verbs in Spanish: AR, ER, and IR verbs. Now you know the endings for all three kinds of verbs. If you were wondering why some of these subject pronouns are in parentheses, I'm going to explain that next. And to do that, I'm going to have us conjugate a verb in English, which is not something you probably have really ever thought about since it's so automatic for you. But to say to speak, to conjugate it in the present tense, I speak, you speak, he or she speaks or it speaks, we speak, you guys or they speak. You can see right away that English has far less variation in its verb forms than Spanish does, meaning we use the same verb form for multiple subject pronouns. So that's why in English it doesn't work to walk into a room and say, speak Spanish really well, speak all the time at home, speak English too. I mean, you can't tell who it is that's doing the speaking, because it could be I speak, it could be you speak, it could be we speak, or it could be you guys or they speak. So in English, we have to use the subject pronoun, I speak, so that people know who in the world we're talking about. But let me scroll back up here to Spanish, and you can see that escribo, that O, isn't used as a verb ending, a verb form for any other subject pronoun. So escribo can only mean I speak. So it's optional to say yo escribo. If you think about it, in language, we always try to be as efficient as we can. So if we don't have to do something, we tend not to do it. So people don't tend to say all the time, yo escribo. The same with escribes. It can't mean anything else other than you write. So what's the point of saying tú escribes? You can just say escribes. When we get down to escribe and escriben, you'll see that it can mean multiple things depending on what subject pronoun you use with it. Like I said earlier, él escribe, he writes. I can't just say escribe bien because I don't know who you're saying writes well. So with these verb forms, you're going to need to include a subject pronoun. So earlier I said, so why would you include the subject pronoun if you don't have to? People might include the subject pronoun to show some emphasis. So if you say something like, he doesn't write a lot of letters to my grandma, but I write a lot of letters, you might then throw in the yo as a contrast. He doesn't do it, but I do it. So using the subject pronoun a lot of times is done for emphasis or to make a distinction. They don't do it, but we write. We oftentimes do that with the intonation of our voice in English. So I write all kinds of letters to my grandma. In Spanish, you can just include the subject pronoun. Sometimes we come off sounding a little bit self-centered as English speakers of Spanish because we tend to overuse the yo. So we like, yo escribo, yo hablo, yo bebo, yo vivo. And it's a little bit overdone because you don't have to do it. So it kind of sounds like I do this and I do that. So just keep that in mind. You certainly can use the subject pronoun. Most of the time people don't, unless it's for some sort of emphasis or distinction. One other thing that is a little bit different in Spanish is that the present tense, like I told you earlier, is used to talk about what you do, what you're doing, and what you will do. So with a sentence like, I'm blanking out on examples here, sorry. I sing in choir. Canto, because cantar is the infinitive, take off the AR, add an O. Canto en coro. If you say something like, I'm singing in the musical, canto en el musical. You don't have to add anything extra for the am part or change anything because it says singing instead of sing. The same with if you were saying he sings well, él canta bien, he's singing. You do not have to have S in there to make it the he's singing. You just say él canta. You will know if it means sings or is singing or will sing based on the context of the sentence, what you're talking about. So keep that in mind, that the present tense in Spanish covers all three of those bases. You don't have to do anything extra for it to mean those additional things.